From the heart of Central Florida, you are listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. Once again, we return live together in the Sunshine State and around the world for another journey of learning and growing together. That's what we're here for. We're here to learn. We're here to think for ourselves. And that's what we're always going to do together, each and every day, Mondays through Fridays. And if you miss an episode, make sure you go to aneighborschoice.com to catch anything you miss. That's where we get into the replays, the exclusives that we do online that you don't get on radio. You can always look forward to that, aneighborschoice.com. And I saw a story that by Matt Taibbi, who is a progressive, a Democrat, and it's on substack.com, his website. Matt Taibbi is most well known for his work in Rolling Stone magazine. And it was published on May 15th, about a week ago. Democrats have abandoned civil liberties. The Blue Party's Trump-era embrace of authoritarianism isn't just wrong, it's a fatal political mistake. Now, Matt Taibbi is someone who is, again, a leftist or progressive, whatever you want to call it. He's a Democrat. But in it, he laments the nastiness and the full-sail embrace by the modern Democratic Party of, surveillance of one's enemies, using the courts and out-of-control police powers to surveil and spy on opponents and to put people in prison for nonviolent things based on dubious evidence, if there is any evidence at all. And he basically just eviscerates his own party, which is just another piece of evidence that, we've come a long way from where, we thought we started from prior to the arrival of the Trump era. But I think what it does reveal is something that I've talked about on my program in the past, which is competition breeds sameness. The more we fight against a common enemy instead of fighting together to solve problems that we all want to solve, the more we get fixated on our enemies, the more likely we are to become so consumed with competition and rivalry that we end up becoming the very same thing that we want to destroy. And you can see that do the parties actually stand for anything anymore? Do the parties actually have any deep philosophy that they abide by when it really comes down to it? For a long time, the Republican Party was known as the warmongering party, with the Bush era neoconservatives ruling things. But before that, Democrats brought us into war. But before that, Republicans were the ones in their earlier years that were leading the charge for Western imperialism around the world. And then Democrats at that time were being more non-interventionist. So it's like going back and forth. And there was a time when the Democratic Party was known as decentralization. It was known as the party of traditional, agrarian lifestyle and farms, and more populist, more rooted in the traditional values of Jeffersonianism or, decentralized power. And now they're the ones that want to expand power the most. But then Republicans say they're for small government, but they grow government and they grow business. Democrats say they're for big government and, small business, but they only help big business. It's all just one amalgamation of the same thing. But nevertheless, what's interesting about it is that even though they have basically the same outcome, more surveillance, more destruction of private property, more destruction of nonviolent solutions, more regulations over the people who are going to create wealth and create amazing breakthroughs in science and energy and medicine. Even though they're so alike, the media has decided to designate that Trump and his allies are the designated bad guys, which is just strange to me. I don't know if it's a personal fixation with his aesthetic. That's what I think it might be. The way he talks is so profane to their worship of government that they just must destroy him at all costs. even though functionally he's growing government and, he's not taking a true axe to the very heart of big government, which is what they want. But, in this article by Matt Taibbi, he says the same mistake is now being made with civil liberties. Millions have lost their jobs and businesses by government fiat. There's a clamor for censorship and contact tracing programs that could have serious long-term consequences, yet voters only hear Trump making occasional remarks about freedom. Democrats treat it like it's a word that should be banned by Facebook. A recent Washington Post headline put the term in quotation marks, as if one should be gloved to touch it. He says, has the Trump era really damaged our thinking to this degree? And I would say, I don't know if it's damaged so much as it's just revealed what was always underneath it, which was the madness of crowds is at the heart of politics. And this just brings it to the surface. Because the Democratic Party had been used to Republicans being, country club, genteel, Mitt Romney, George Bush Sr. types, George W. Bush types, don't really punch back, kind of like the designated fall guy, the designated villains, too above the fray to get messy. And then all of a sudden Donald Trump, who was a creature of their world, the television world of the left, comes out from his cartoonish caricature of being a big capitalist who's gaudy and decadent, which they didn't mind him in that role for Howard Stern and NBC. The moment that character came out of the television and said, oh, actually, I'm going to take you on and I'm going to talk like an average person and I'm going to not give you soaring rhetoric that bedazzles you into a hypnosis of believing that everything's okay with a perpetually expanding state here and abroad. Once he did that, it was like it had disrupted their very hierarchy of the way things are supposed to be. And that's why the left has lost their mind, and they've lost even the semblance of being rooted in liberty and rooted in protection of our privacy from surveillance. You've got according to the article, people were cheering Edward Snowden. They went from cheering Edward Snowden to lionizing the CIA, NSA, and FBI and making on-air partners out of drone and surveillance stars like John Brennan, James Clapper, and Michael Hayden. They are now too many ex-spooks on CNN and MSNBC to count, while there isn't a single regular contributor on any of the networks one could describe as anti-war. And that's right, the left used to be anti-war, but because they're so focused on mimetic obsession with rivaling whatever Trump does, they, again, have revealed the insanity of the whole political enterprise. That do we really have principles governing most of the political party actions and the media pundits? I think there's some of that out there. But the question is, how much of that really is at play? I think so many people, their biggest principle is power. Give me power. Make me powerful. And they get their power by their favorite avatar, their favorite figure. That's what we call a politician, winning the power, and they get to vicariously live through that power. And then in some cases, if they're a DC crony, they get to actually enjoy that power by being invited to the special cocktail parties and given special access and being able to sit at the cool kids table. Yes, my friends, it's that petty. It's same old high school politics, but this time there's drone strikes and mass theft and bailouts in the making of the whole game. But joining me now is someone who's a friend. He's been on the program. He's an economist, an anthropologist. He joins us from Gainesville. Mark Sunwall, how you doing?
Hey, David, how you doing?
Great. So I wanted to have you on because I want to talk about Ivan Illich and what he.
Very good. Yeah.
He's someone that I think could be a helpful guide through unpacking some of the craziness that we're seeing in politics today. But first, any thoughts on Matt Taibbi's article? I don't know if you read it yourself, but just what I'm talking about it. It is interesting, isn't it, that the Democratic Party has abandoned any semblance of being on the side of privacy and on the side of anti-war. I mean, they're like George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, but they like transgender bathroom politics. That's about the only thing different.
Yeah. No, actually, I hadn't read the Hayden article. What medium did you discover that on? Where was he published?
That was on Substack.com, which is Taibbi's website. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. You are right on in that, and he is right on. It's good to see, people in the left who are aware of, the terrible, sort of evolution that the left has undergone in recent years in this country. And the irony of it is that if you go back, and we're going to be talking about a guy who really, even today, is thought of as a kind of leftist, very much, very unabashed leftist. But today, of course, he would be horrified of what was going on in the American political left. The funny thing is that what the left people seem to be saying, if you go back to the history of their movement, you would see it as beginning with incendiary kind of Russian movement at the end of the 19th and the early 20th century. They're saying, if we go back and we look at history, the old Bolsheviks were wrong and Stalin was right? The old Bolsheviks were the one who said power to the people. And, of course, they lost out to Stalin and, of course, Lenin in his later phase, in the form of state socialism, and that's exactly what's happened to the left today. The left has made an unholy alliance with the organs of power in all the institutions, and you see the result, right?
Yeah, it's a scary. It's like the French Revolution, where the people calling for people's heads to be to the guillotine are now, or the ones that were fighting against it are now the ones going to the guillotine themselves, aren't they? It's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the terror. Really, we're living in a kind of terror, although actually at this point it's mostly a psychological terror, right? The terror of not so much your head is going to get cut off, as you're going to lose your job, or you'll be ostracized, whatever. But yeah, we're living in a time of terror, really, at the political level. Of course,
and
if you tune out, you don't have to.
And it functions as kind of almost psychotic or psychopathic or something, because the left is constantly telling us that we're in a doomsday scenario with our planet, so we need massive population control, but yet at the same time they want to destroy the entire world economy and put everybody in a cage to ostensibly protect the elderly and the vulnerable from this new virus. So how in the world can any thinking adult hold both of those crazy things in mind? Say, I want to destroy the entire economy to save the planet from human population increase, and at the same time, I want to destroy the entire economy and give all power to prevent one extra elderly person from dying. Those things. Yeah, precisely. How is that a sane? How in the world can sane adults hold those two thoughts and have them with such fervor? It's beyond me.
Yeah, well, they do, because they're not operating according to reason. They're operating according to propagandistic slogans, and they're internalizing those as emotional, good feels, I suppose.
Well, Mark Sunwall, I'm glad you're here with us, because maybe we can try to sort through some of that propaganda when we continue with our good friend Ivan Illich that we're going to study and look at. We'll continue live on A Neighbor's Choice. Don't miss it.
A lawsuit is a devastating process for families. It can be an emotional roller coaster ride. There is a law firm in Tampa Bay that practices with this in mind. That law firm is Catania and Catania. We know and handle personal injury law for families with care. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania and Catania will take care of the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't even realize they can claim compensation for their loss until they talk to us. Catania and Catania only represent private individuals. We treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's our way of practicing law. It's our commitment to you. Remember, we don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com, award-winning, over 28 years, and family first. Catania Catania, personal injury, auto accident, and motorcycle accident attorneys.
Attorney spokeswoman. Thinking about buying a new home while interest rates are at historic lows? Call Century 21 Coast to Coast, Kimberly Clark. Put Kimberly's 16 years of experience, area knowledge, and integrity to work for you to find your perfect home in your price range. Click Kimberly, the People's Choice Realtor for Pinellas at PinellasHomesForSale.com or call her today at 727-279-3759. That's 727-279-3759.
Let's face it, these are stressful times. New routines, the constant bombardment of bad news, and trying to keep you and your family safe all the time. It's Frank for Center for Men's Health. During these stressful times, your mood is so critical, and nothing's more important to a guy's mood than testosterone. The single greatest issue for guys with low T is mood, and the single greatest change for men that get low T care is a greatly improved mood. Many are grumpy when they start, and most can't believe how much their mood improves once they get treated. And everything improves once your mood improves. Feel the difference C4MH.com can make in your life. I've been a patient of C4MH.com for a couple of years, and recently I've lost 20 pounds because now I have the energy to work out from home. And that'll put you in a good mood too. C4MH.com's express treatment plan is convenient, affordable, and above all, safe. And with locations all up and down West Florida, there's one near you right now. Find out more. Go to C4MH.com.
And now, Easy Lift Movers is on the air, reminding all Americans to show support to the brave men and women of our U.S. military. Their bravery and tireless efforts should never go unnoticed. This salute is brought to you by Easy Lift Movers, serving the community with quality and pride. Call the pros today, 813-505-8474. That's 813-505-8474. Also, all troops and veterans will receive a 10% discount. That's Easy Lift Movers, proudly saluting our troops and veterans. They are professionals who care.
Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm David Gornoski, your host, here with Mark Sunwall, who joins us from Gainesville, Florida area. And so, Mark, I want to dive into I'm going to give you a quote from Ivan Illich that I think sums up kind of an interesting way to look at what we're facing right now politically with the pandemic. Healthy people are those who live in healthy homes on a healthy diet and an environment equally fit for birth, growth, work, healing, and dying. Healthy people need no bureaucratic interference to mate, give birth, share the human condition, and die. That's Ivan Illich. I think that has something to do with what we're going through right now, where we have so much cry for bureaucracy to be the only means of saving us from the afflictions of life, you know?
Right, yeah. Well, that was a very kind of omnibus quote, actually. I wasn't even aware of that quote, and it was very good because it sort of covered the entire life cycle, and it showed how, from Illich's point of view, of course, first of all, before I launch into this, just to tie up what you've been talking about the previous segments, Illich really is a good example of somebody, if you are somebody who wants to be a leftist or something like that, and you want to know what an authentic leftist really was before the sort of etatisme, the sort of state taker of left-wing politics, Ivan Illich is an excellent person, you know. So I think he's kind of a unifying point between the concerns that conservatives have today about the increasing probability of a global state, you know, a universal transnational state, and the older concerns that the left wing used to have about, you know, the empowerment of the people, right? The people being in their family, their communities, that sort of thing, right? So he's a very timely person with regard to kind of the sellout of the left, and, you know, a real authentic original leftist, you know, that they had when there was such an ideology. He's a prime example of a good philosopher, right? Working in that tradition, right? He would be very surprised that conservatives today would be able to borrow from him and appreciate what he was talking about. But with regard to that quotation, even Illich was a critic of all the different institutions which had been joined to the state, right? So he talks about education, health, notably those were two of the main ones. Other areas, I'm sure. But the ones that come to people's mind usually are education and health, especially education, because his original book, Deschooling Society, came out and became kind of a classic of the 1960s, and it had very interesting recommendations, right, with regard to how to deinstitutionalize education and make it more human-centered, right? And today, of course, if you look at the universities, they've become just incredibly bureaucratized. I mean, today, if you want to get a BA, just the basic degree, your investment is like, investing on a ranch, let's say, out in the countryside, where you have livestock and you have a mansion in the middle. I mean, basically that's what a 4-year education costs, And of course, most people can't do that without financing, and they get financed and then they find out that they're starting out life in debt, right? So it's pretty obvious that the educational system, as it works right now, doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work to the advantage of the people who are the educational consumers, right? So Ivan Illich was very much ahead of the curve on that one, right? His recommendations sounded very similar to the kind of things that people are doing today with regard to online education, right? Taking things, selectively, TED Talks, that kind of thing. He didn't quite foresee the exact kind of technology that it was going to take to put those programs into effect, but he was kind of a prophet, and he's not just a philosopher, but a kind of prophet, I think. So it's very interesting on education, even more interesting on health because of the present situation. But the interesting thing about the educational front is there is some progress which has been made. I wish I could say that about medicine, but with regard to education, we see some signs of hope. One of the things that's been happening with regard to the kids being at home these days is they've been forced to resort to online curriculum, which of course are usually much better than the curricula that is advertised or implemented in the public schools. So,
Mark, we're up against a break here, but I wanted to set the table for when we return. School is the advertising agency which makes you believe that you need the society as it is. That's another quote from Ivan Illich, so we'll continue to unpack what that means. School is an advertising agency which makes you believe that you need the society as it is. We'll continue in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice, and learn more about school and medical care with the advice of a great philosopher like Ivan to help us unpack.
Special report, Coronavirus Update. I'm Evan Haining. As states loosen restrictions and the pandemic continues to take lives, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell calls the House's $3 trillion coronavirus relief plan unserious and dead on arrival.
He also slams members for approving proxy voting on a temporary basis due to the coronavirus.
One absurd, unserious proposal. And now they're playing games with the Constitution so they can continue their never-ending spring break.
Ironic, says House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as Leader McConnell refuses to take up the House bill and as the Senate prepares to head out of town for a Memorial Day recess.
We have the HEROES bill. Others say he has the ZEROES bill.
A reference to the HEROES Act, the name of the House's coronavirus bill, and the absence of a Senate bill in its place. Linda Kenyon, Washington.
America's pandemic death toll is nearing 94,000. I'm Evan Haining.
Right now, home sweet home has never been sweeter. Our homes are more important than ever, and finding people we trust to take care of them is just as important. For over 20 years, Home Advisor has been connecting homeowners with trusted local plumbers, electricians, roofers, and more. And now we're making it easier than ever for great pros to join the Home Advisor network. For a limited time, home service businesses can get $200 in free advertising. Visit homeadvisor.com/start200 for details. That's homeadvisor.com/start200.
Individuals and businesses with tax problems, listen carefully. If you owe over $10,000 in back taxes or have unfiled tax returns, U.S. Tax Shield can help you take back control. The IRS can seize your bank accounts, garnish your paycheck, close your business, and file criminal charges. Our team of tax attorneys can stop collections and get you protected. U.S. Tax Shield offers a price protection guaranteed quote to get you protected today. U.S. Tax Shield is A+ rated with the BBB, so call 800-466-9625. U.S. Tax Shield, 800-466-9625.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. David Gornoski here with my friend Mark Sunwall, who's an anthropological and economist mind. I love hearing from Mark Sunwall because he's gifted in many fields. He's got an understanding of the geopolitical world too. He's lived overseas in Japan as well. So we're glad to have you with us, Mark. And I wanted to go through this headline here for our audience. It's a new CDC guidelines to reopening schools. Here's some things. Wear mask over the age of 2. Okay. Sounds like a wonderful day at school. No sharing of any items or supplies, all belongings in individual cubbies or labeled containers. No sharing electronic devices, toys, games, learning aids. Desks 6 feet apart, all facing the same way. Distance on school buses, 1 child per seat. Skip rows. Install sneeze guards and partitions wherever you cannot space 6 feet apart. What is that, are they going to have like a plastic guard, like a prison or something? One-way routes and hallways. Tape on sidewalks and walls to assure kids stay 6 feet apart. No communal shared spaces. Cafeterias, playgrounds. Physical barriers or screens between sinks and bathrooms. Only pre-packages, boxes or bags of food instead of cafeteria food. Kids eat in classrooms. No field trips. No assemblies or external organizations in the schools. Limit volunteers and visitors. Same children stay with same staff all day. No switching groups or teachers. Stagger arrival and departure times for students to limit exposure to crowds of kids. If possible, daily health and temperature checks. And several rules about cleaning and disinfecting throughout the day and hand washing frequently. Wow. That sounds
worse
like
than a prison.
Yeah, worse than a prison. Isn't that the truth?
Worse than a prison, far worse. Yeah.
And I put a little comment there when I posted this. I said, God always makes a way for people to come out of Egypt. And I think this is our moment,
That's
true.
Yeah.
Because this pandemic gives people an out, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Things are sort of coming to a crisis right now. Things are going to have to budge one way or the other, I suppose. But there is, and I think you've mentioned this in the past too, we don't want to get in the tendency of thinking everything was great before this particular medical crisis hit,
Yeah.
Because things were pretty bad before, the schools had all these problems. And of course, problems just continue to get worse and worse. If you set a baseline, say, whenever Ivan Illich wrote Deschooling Society, was something like 1970 or something like that, and things progressively got worse, maybe pun intended, I don't know, until today and the medical crisis. And now they have, essentially putting everybody in a bubble, especially the kids, The kids have to go to this common area, and then they have to be put in bubbles, right? It's not a very good situation. And it's sort of interesting that it doesn't seem to have anything to do with ideology either. Any sort of ideology, recognizable ideology that you could somehow salvage from the older left-wing ideas, because essentially what they're saying is all the things that you used to, that the left wing used to criticize about bourgeois ideology or bourgeois morality, the excessive individualism and the selfishness and, the concept of privacy. They're just going whole hog on that to a greater degree than any sort of bourgeois thinker could have ever devised. So no sharing, no interaction, no hugging, all these things that, you would think that the traditional left would have thought was such a great thing. And, for one reason or another, they have decided to institute a total process of individualization, so in the negative sense, in the sense of social isolation. Of course, they would claim that this was due to something in the environment that was forcing their hand, but it seems like these programs fit the power aggrandizement paradigm too well to simply be the result of some sort of physiological cause.
And another thing that's there is this bias towards thinking that man's solutions are better than what God has designed in our created order. The idea of, we can't risk the old-fashioned herd immunity effect. We would rather put our faith in scientists to come up with a vaccine to create herd immunity by synthetic form, rather than let humans and children who don't seem to be affected as much by this illness at all, hardly, develop natural herd immunity. So it's like we don't trust the natural design of creation to be good. We believe that humans can engineer, but we know, I don't know what the origins of this current virus is, but we know that humans have got labs all over the world where they're doing gain of function labs, where they're trying to take deadly viruses and make them even worse than before. I can't believe that that's happening with our tax dollars. Well, I guess I can believe it, but I can't believe that there's not more pushback about that. Even if this thing that's coming through right now has nothing to do with the lab, the idea that having experienced the awfulness of a new virus, that those labs would be continually funded with our money is an absolute abomination to me.
Yeah. Well, you hear of, one or two of the more dangerous ones having been shut down, but of course, they have many of them. But, in the broader context, I mean, we're going back to, the time when Ivan Illich was, first publishing his diatribes and so forth. And you look at the ecology movement, and the ecology movement is a very, illustrative example of the duplicity involved in this kind of ideological bait and switch. I guess you could call it kind of a bait and switch, because remember, the ecology movement began as a form of sort of secular piety, right? The ecology movement began as a protest on the part of human beings against human encroachments on the environment. And that's why it kind of picked up steam. You had Earth Day and all this. I think the first Earth Day was 1970, around there, And, then they've continued to have it become increasingly institutionalized. But originally they picked up a lot of, sort of consensual agreement by people with conservationists, religious people, all sorts of people who felt, creation was indeed being infringed upon by the human race, and, we need to conserve more and that sort of thing. Well, the problem is that the ideology switches diametrically to its opposite, because if you look at what the outcome now is the global warming narrative basically is saying that human beings must take control of the planet, right? So it's kind of a power grab by the experts, the global elite, the scientists and so forth, to turn planet Earth into a kind of an automaton under their administration, to take the administration of God or nature or whatever you wish to call it over and, assign that to human elites, right? So it's that kind of a thing, ideologically, it's, I suppose it's, in a negative sense, you could call it dialectical, in the sense that, it's the exact opposite of the selling point that they originally made, that this was a kind of a sort of an earth-based piety or an earth-based sense of eliminating human hubris or eliminating human overreach, right? No, it's not eliminating human overreach. It's reaching out to control, right? Is what it is.
And what's the secret ingredient behind all of that? It's sacrifice, that they can use their power of the administration of coercion to make people submit and to sacrifice those who don't obey. And if they use that power of sacrifice appropriately in their mind, they'll be able to steer nature into the direction that they want to make like gods,
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, if you looked at history, particularly illustrations from biblical history, you'd find some very dark analogies there, with the sacrifice of children to Moloch and that sort of thing, Yeah, people get a sense of power when they have the power of life and death over other people, and it makes them think they're gods, and of course, if they're gods, then of course they can administer what has previously been administered by nature or God, the Creator God. It's a very,
But of course, the left, their whole argument, which a lot of them sincerely believe, is that those who want to have economic freedom are actually the ones practicing sacrifice. That if you allow people to voluntarily socially distance, that's not enough. That's sacrificially harming people by spreading the virus, because they don't believe that human beings can function voluntarily. They believe you have to implement the force and the threat of sacrificial violence from the state in order to get anything accomplished, like surviving a pandemic. You see, so their faith is in violence. It's violence that's the secret ingredient. Because a lot of the folks who are against the lockdowns and stuff, they're not against wearing masks or against distancing and staying away from those who, but that's not enough for these folks. It's the secret ingredient is the violence. That's where they get excited. It's that you got to have the violence, you got to have the force, or I don't want anything to do with your idea,
Right. Yeah, if it's just if it's some medicine or, some good health advice or something like that, that's, they're saying, well, that's just some sort of placebo or something, without the violence, it's not a real solution. Something like that.
That sounds like the issue that Jesus was battling on the cross. He said, it is finished. What was finished? The idea that we should have faith in violence to solve our problems. You know what I mean? The idea that...
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Very much so, yeah. I mean, you can get down a very deep rabbit hole on those theological issues, which maybe at some time we'll talk about that too. But, getting back to Ivan Illich, the thing about Illich is that he did propose alternatives to state institutions and, institutions with, and by the way, I think all the institutions at this point, and this is, I'm afraid some of the sort of left-wing libertarians don't understand this. I'm not even sure they're left-wing, neoliberal, let's say. Pretty much all the institutions now, even if they're not part of the department of this or the department of that, have been taken over by the state. I mean, the media and the universities and foundations, they're all, in a sense, one consolidated, crystallized state apparatus at this point. So So we're dealing with a society which, even though it may not be calling itself socialist, it's kind of a corporativist statist society, right? But at any rate, the solutions that even Illich was suggesting for schooling, for example, sounds a lot like some of the things that people are trying to do today in the more open areas of the internet. In other words, he was very much for what you'd call liberal education at the ground level. You know, he was for people, instead of sitting in a classroom with a standardized curriculum, sitting around a book, you know, whatever that book might be. You know, it might be the Bible, or it might be the dialogues of Plato, you know, it might be a book by somebody like Isaac Newton or whatever, you know. It might be a great work of literature like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky or something like that. And the education process is essentially, for even Illich, a dialogical process. It's not a kind of hierarchical process. And that sort of thing, you know, we do have the technology for, but it's interesting, maybe one of the reasons why the authoritarian elements in society are hyping up the threats these days and are ramping up their efforts is because they're scared that this kind of technology, if not controlled by them, will actually contribute to the liberation of society. You know, so
the technology of education at home and that kind of thing.
That's exactly, yeah. I mean, we're moving in that direction right now with some of these, you know, homeschooling curriculums. You know, you've heard about, you know, whatever, the Ron Paul curriculum, and there's several others, right? And even those have some problems because, of course, they are modeled on the state curriculum, and of course that means they have a certain degree of rigidity in them. You know, they're not totally flexible, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. You know, and we're seeing, you know, if there's a silver lining here, right, I would say it would be in the educational area, you know, that the contrast between, you know, I wonder how these kids are going to feel, you know, if they go back and they're more obviously and seriously and psychologically coercively affected by these new changes, they're going to probably wish they were back at their house, you know, studying with their computers or something, you know.
Yeah, that's what I think. This is an opening. Maybe this is a saving grace moment where we've got an opening to say, hey, we've got the social momentum to push us out of our comfort zone and start looking at alternative education programs outside of government schooling. Maybe this is a silver lining in this awful moment. Let's continue with Mark Sunwall, our guest. When we continue in a moment, I'm going to ask him about the Good Samaritan and what even Illich can teach us about the Good Samaritan lesson and what we can learn from it today. And we'll continue in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice.
A lawsuit is a devastating process for families. It can be an emotional roller coaster ride. There is a law firm in Tampa Bay that practices with this in mind. That law firm is Catania and Catania. We know and handle personal injury law for families with care. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania Catania will take care of the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't even realize they can claim compensation for their loss until they talk to us. Catania and Catania only represent private individuals. We treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's our way of practicing law. It's our commitment to you. Remember, we don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com, award-winning, over 28 years, and family first. Catania Catania, personal injury, auto accident, and motorcycle accident attorneys.
Attorney spokeswoman. Hey, it's Bob the Love Sponge. With all the coronavirus stuff going on, you've heard the CDC say wash your hands about a zillion times. You know, studies show that the average person touches their face 23 times an hour. Your nose, eyes, and mouth, that's called the T-zone. And the T-zone is the most important area to keep clean. And for over 12 years, there's this product called TheraWorks Protect. It's been used by millions of emergency room patients and medical clinics to support infection prevention. TheraWorks Protect is easy to use, and it's safe to apply several times a day on your hands and around your nose and eyes eyes and mouth, better known again as the T-zone. Just apply a small amount into your hand and rub it in until it dries, and then apply another amount and rub it all over your T-zone. You know, finding hand sanitizer sometimes can be difficult, and now you can order TheraWorks Protect online. Just get it directly from them. Go to tzoneprotect.com and use the Bubba Kicker. When you use the Bubba / you're going to get 20% off and free freight, and you're going to have it in a few days. Again, tzoneprotect.com /Bubba. Start protecting yourself and the ones that you love now.
Black Rock Grill is open again. Yep, I took the team to Black Rock for our truly special occasion on opening night. It's such a unique experience, unlike anything you've ever tasted. They serve it on that unique 755-degree hot stone. You cook it right there at the table, bathed in that amazing casino butter. Wow, every bite sizzling hot, better than the last. It's an award-winning steakhouse featuring 100% pure Angus beef. The method of cooking the hottest thing in the culinary world. You got to try it. And in these uncertain financial times, very reasonable. A steak dinner with 2 sides, just $15.99. And they've gone to great expense to make you feel safe. 30-plus sanitation stations, FDA-approved bacteria-erasing foggers, glass dividers between the booths. Nothing is left to chance. And don't forget our friends at Black Rock were there when you needed them, handing out thousands of free meals to our frontline workers and neighbors in need. An amazing commitment to the neighborhood. Black Rock Bar and Grill, 2 locations, Carrollwood and Brandon, for a truly unique dining experience. Go to blackrockrestaurants.com.
Hello, David Gornoski here. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. We're live, and I'm here with Mark Sunwall, who's an anthropologist and economist from Gainesville. Welcome, Radio Land. Welcome to our podcast. Welcome to our live stream, wherever you're enjoying us. We're glad that you're joining us and learning together with us as we grow from these challenges and look for better ways to improve our lives and improve those around us. So, Mark, I wanted to kind of finish with just a quick thought about, even Illich. I have something to tell you. I've got David Cayley, who was the legendary CBC broadcaster who knew Ivan, and he knew Rene Girard, two of our favorites. And I'm going to have him on tomorrow live on this radio program to explore what he learned with his relationships with Rene Girard and Ivan
that's
Illich.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so that'll be exciting. But in his interview with David Cayley on CBC Radio, that was a very famous exchange that Ivan Illich did. There was the discussion about the Good Samaritan and how I love the way Ivan talks about it, because he says basically that the purpose of that story is to get us to see the radical choice involved that we have to make. It's not like you can take the Good Samaritan story and then distill it into some kind of abstract principle which can be administered on a bureaucratic level, but rather it's something that happens in the moment of risk, in the moment of looking at someone who is ostensibly even an enemy and saying, I will go and tend to them. That risk, that leap of faith for the other is kind of the core that he talks about there, right?
Yeah. I have to make a disclaimer in the sense that I actually didn't know either of those men, although I've been, they're part of my, pantheon of heroes, as it were, but just from a point of view of reading their posthumous works. So, I'd be very interested in listening in tomorrow and seeing what goes on. That's certainly true. And the thing about the parable of the Good Samaritan, is very interesting. This is where kind of the anthropology part comes in. I don't talk a lot about that sort of stuff with you so much. I'm trying to stick to the philosophy, as it were, the philosophical anthropology, maybe. But when you look at the situation that obtained between the Samaritan people and the ethnic group that Jesus or Yeshua was affiliated with, and he was a Galilean, of course, but the Galileans were sort of mainstream Jews. They weren't quote heretics unquote like the Samaritans, right? Well, it's very interesting. As you know, about 40 years after the death of Jesus, the temple was destroyed, right? The temple was destroyed. And, of course, from a Christian point of view, this has to do with the fact that, well, there wasn't a king to look over the temple. you kill the Messiah, you don't have a temple either. In Jewish tradition, it's very interesting what the ascribed reason is for the destruction of the second temple. If you don't know it already, I think you'll be amused, or not, amused probably isn't the word, but bemused, right, or saddened perhaps. The reason, according to Jewish tradition, the second temple, the temple of Herod, the one that Jesus prophesied as coming to an end soon, the reason for its destruction was unreasoning hatred amongst mankind, particularly the Jews, right, but amongst the human race, right? And that's kind of what we have now, You notice that everybody is sort of ganged up one way or the other. You're either all the way with Trump, or you're never Trumper, or, you're either liberal or conservative, you're either conspiracy theorist, or you go with the mainstream media, that sort of thing. It's kind of an unreasoning hatred, and this is the kind of thing which can actually destroy a world. It's very interesting that reflecting back on that kind of thing, people thought, well, this was cause for the destruction of the second temple, right? Well, actually, the temple of our bodies and the temple of our political body, the body politic of the United States is right now being destroyed, right? And the reason for this destruction is unreasoning hatred, just like the unreasoning hatred that used to permeate the relationship between the mainstream Orthodox Jews and the heretical Samaritans. And it's interesting that in Jesus' parable, right, it's not a person within his group. Of course, he was, yet evolving beyond that, but the point is that he would have identified with the Jews of Judea, and the temple and that sort of thing, not with the Jews of Samaria, or what he would consider pseudo-Jews, right? And then he has the Samaritan be the hero, right? It's the Samaritan who is the one who makes what you'd call the neighbor's choice, right? It's the Samaritan who does that. So, we have to put ourselves imaginatively in the position where we think the person who has the opposite ideology of us, might be the person who would save us, or maybe we are the person who should be saving the person with the opposite ideology, And I think that's a good reason for, taking seriously people like Ivan Illich, Ivan Illich was pretty far to the left. I mean, he said some pretty nasty things, like, all these good things that everybody believes in, like the Peace Corps, and, Kennedy liked the Peace Corps, he instituted it and so forth. And, Ivan Illich just, once he, got into bad-mouthing somebody, he really bad-mouthed people. But the other thing about Illich is he was operating out of a point of compassion, right? So there's certain ways that you can criticize people, which is a compassionate criticism, and there's other ways which you can criticize people, which is just pure scapegoating, right? And it's pretty clear if you listen to the content of people's discourse, which is which. So, at any rate, I don't know, are we coming up to the end of the segment? I don't know.
Yes, Mark, thanks for your time. It's a pleasure talking to you, and we'll continue to follow your work. Mark Sunwall, thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
A Neighbor's Choice will continue. Up next, we'll hear from Jeff Deist of the Mises Institute, and we'll go to Science and You with Dr. You. Don't miss it. More to come.